Hey guys, Shishia here, back with another video. This time is the highly requested Frost Mage guide. A while back, I released two infographics for this class's specs, the Icicle spec and the Frostbeam spec. Since then, there have been a lot of changes to this class because of the major balance patch, which will be live for global as well. This video will showcase the new and updated builds for both specs as well as some background gameplay. If you enjoyed this video and or find it useful, do hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell to get notified about future videos like these. I also stream on Twitch regularly, so follow to catch me live and ask any questions you might have about the game. Now without further ado, let's get right into the video. The written versions of this guide are on Maxroll, link in the description, so do check them out and you can refer to them in the future if there are any minor changes made to the builds. If there are any major changes like balance patch updates, the guides will be updated very quickly to provide you guys up-to-date information. This guide will be using the localized names for the global version. However, on launch, the names might be different if there are any updates to the localization, so use the icons and visuals to match up the nodes and skills if that is the case. The Frost Mage is a damage dealer class that scales with intellect. There are two different specs you can choose to go for. One is the single target oriented spec, the Icicle spec, and the other one is the AoE oriented spec, the Frostbeam spec. But first, let us go over the main tree that will have to be maxed out to access the two different specs. Firstly, we have the node called Ice Revelation. This node unlocks the class mechanic called Ice Cores. 2 ice cores will be summoned beside you when you enter combat. These cores have a chance to shoot out an ice arrow that deals damage and generates a frost crystal. Next, we have Intellect Conversion. This node increases your magic attack based on your intellect. Take secondary amp after to increase your current highest advanced attribute by 3.5%. Next, we have Cold Stream and Cold Intent Sharp. Cold Stream increases your ice energy limit and regen speed scaling with your haste attribute. Cold Intent Sharp increases your ice energy limit as well, and also increases your special attack damage. Get Intellect Cooling and Cold Intent Flow after. Intellect Cooling reduces your skill cooldowns after reaching 300 intellect. Cold Intent Flow further increases your ice energy limit and special attack damage. The last core node we look at is Frost Explosion. This will cause your ice arrows to deal an additional instance of AoE damage to help with clearing out mobs easier. Finish off the tree with Instant Cooling, Breath of Frost, and Frost Curse Sigil. That is all for the core nodes in the main tree. Let's move on to understanding how to build and play both specs of Frost Mage. We will first be looking at the single target oriented spec, Icicle spec. If you are more interested in the AoE oriented spec, Frostbeam spec, use the chapters to skip directly to my guide on Frostbeam spec. Firstly, the advanced attributes. For Icicle Mage, we want to prioritize crit, then luck, then versatility, and a little bit of mastery. Crit is the most important stat for most damage dealer classes, since it greatly increases your damage. While luck may be a bad stat in terms of dealing damage, we want luck for some talent synergies. I'll explain why later when we go over the talent nodes. Mastery increases ice elemental damage, so it is good to have a little bit of it. We also want a bit of versatility since it is multiplicative with the rest of the attributes. The last stat, Haste, is something that you do not want to go for in your equipment. And the reason is because your skill Permafrost, when activated, already gives you 21% plus 1040 haste when maxed out, which is enough haste for this spec. However, these stat priorities only apply when you have access to Gearset pieces. At level 40 gear, do not build luck at all. You only get luck from your Gearset pieces. For my min-maxers, you want at least 50% crit, 20% luck, 15% versatility, and 10% mastery. Any leftover stats should go towards getting more crit. Let's take a look at what skills we run. The default special attack Frost Lance and the ultimate Glacier Hymn will remain. The expertise skills we want to run are Meteor Storm, Crystal Veil, Blizzard, and Permafrost. It is recommended to replace Blizzard with Maelstrom before you have max talent points because Blizzard is very weak before allocating the talent nodes to improve it. You can also choose to run Frost Shelter over Blizzard for a way to dodge high damage attacks from bosses. For skill book priority, upgrade Frost Lance first, followed by Meteor Storm, Permafrost, Blizzard, your ultimate, Crystal Veil, and finally your basic attack. Maelstrom and Frost Shelter do not need to be upgraded. Here are what the skills do. Frost Lance consumes 10 ice energy to cast a Frost Lance at the target, dealing magic damage after channeling for 1.4 seconds. When a Frost Crystal is available, it is consumed to skip the cast time and increase the damage by 20%. Glacier Hymn summons an ice domain around you, knocking enemies back and summons a comment on the target enemy, dealing magic damage and freezing all enemies hit. While in the domain, restore 220 ice energy over time and enter the ultra cold state. While in ultra cold state, enemies are treated as frozen. Frozen targets take 20% more damage and unfreeze when hit. Meteor Storm consumes 5 ice energy to summon 3 meteors above the target, dealing magic damage in the target area. This skill has 2 charges. Crystal Veils casts a slow-moving water orb that slows down even more when hitting an enemy. It continuously deals damage and applies frost, slowing enemies by 30%. Immediately gain a frost crystal when cast, and every 3 seconds after gain an additional 1. When in the ultra cold state, the water orb will freeze and explode upon ending, dealing magic damage to enemies. You can cast Crystal Veil before casting an ultimate and it will still freeze and explode. This skill has 2 charges. Blizzard channels for 2.9 seconds, then consumes 20 ice energy to summon a blizzard at the targeted enemy, dealing damage and applying frost to all enemies in the area. Permafrost is a 10-second buff skill that generates 6 ice energy per second and increases haste for the duration. Maelstrom summons a water vortex below the targeted enemy, pulls surrounding enemies in, and deals magic damage. Each time damage is dealt, restore 2 ice energy for every enemy hit. While in the ultra cold state, the water vortex will freeze and explode upon ending, dealing magic damage to enemies. Frost Shelter encases you in ice, making you immune to all damage but unable to move for the duration. This deals magic damage to all nearby enemies and inflicts slow, which slowly freezes the enemy. Now here is the talent build for Icicle Mage. There are 2 different builds for Icicle Mage. One build is for very consistent damage that requires less stats to pull off, so it is suitable for the early game or long fights. Other build is for more concentrated burst damage that requires very high crit to work, so it is more suitable for endgame players who wish to min-max or short fights. I will first go through the more consistent build and then highlight the changes for the burst build after. Selecting Icicle enhances Frost Lance to trigger ice arrows when landing a crit. The first talent node we take is Shattering Strike. This causes Meteor Storm to trigger ice arrows, generating a frost crystal. This node is especially important in helping you consistently generate frost crystals. Next, we want Snow Shadow. This reduces the cooldown of Crystal Veil by 1 second for every 25 ice energy consumed. Having these 2 nodes greatly increases your frost crystal generation rate, which is vital in ensuring you can maintain your rotation for a longer time. Take Energy Saving, Deep Cold Magic Spear, and Frostblade next. Energy Saving refunds 50% of the energy consumed after casting Frost Lance with a Frost Crystal. Deep Cold Magic Spear increases Frost Lance damage at the cost of increasing its cast time. Frostblade increases Frost Lance damage if cast with a Frost Crystal. These nodes only benefit us since we only want to cast Frost Lance only if we have a Frost Crystal available. Next, go for Frost Domain. This node reduces the size of the domain summoned by Glacier Hymn, but while you stand in it, you gain a 25% ice damage bonus. This is really good since you do not actually need the knockback from the Frost Domain. Now it's time to unlock a very important node that introduces you to a big part of your damage rotation. Pick the node Endless Cold. A blue counter beside your stamina bar now shows up. This is the counter for how many Frost Crystals have been consumed. For every 20 Frost Crystal consumed, you enter the Endless Cold effect. For 10 seconds, Meteor Storm damage is increased by 150% and its cooldown and energy cost is removed. However, during this period, ice arrows triggered by Meteor Storm will not produce Frost Crystals. Additionally, when Endless Cold is triggered during Permafrost, you only enter Endless Cold when Permafrost ends. You can continue consuming Frost Crystals during this period to increase the final damage dealt by Meteor Storm by 5% for every extra crystal consumed up to 100%. Moving on, go for Luck Damage and Glaze Vastness. Luck Damage increases lucky hit damage scaling based on your luck attribute. Glaze Vastness increases your damage dealt towards elites and bosses. If you have followed the tree up to here so far, you will have spent 50 points in total and can move on to the bottom part of the tree. If not, you might have missed out on some of the intermediate nodes, so have a look and see which ones you might have missed out on. Go for Frozen Stars to unlock a way to reset Meteor Storm for free. If you trigger a crit and Lucky Strike at the same time with Frost Lance, immediately reset 1 charge of Meteor Storm. This is why having some luck in your build is not a bad thing to have. Since you spam Frost Lance a lot, this actually happens quite often and lets you cast Meteor Storm more often to generate Frost Crystals. Next, unlock Freezing Meteor Storm. This node has a 20% chance for Meteor Storm to freeze enemies hit. Additionally, during Permafrost, when Frost Lance and Meteor Storm crits, extend the duration of Permafrost by 0.5 seconds up to 5 seconds. This node is important to extend Permafrost as long as you can. Unlock Frost Comet and Frost Lance Barrage after. Frost Comet summons a comet when Frost Lance cast with a Frost Crystal triggers a crit or a Lucky Strike. Frost Lance Barrage casts 2 Frost Lances when under the effects of Permafrost. This greatly increases your damage and is also a good reason why you want to extend Permafrost for as long as you can. Go for Meteor Storm Expansion and Infusion Sublimation next. Meteor Storm Expansion increases Meteor Storm's hit count by 1 and increases ice damage by 10%. Infusion Sublimation increases the Frost Crystal cap by 1, and during Permafrost, you gain 100 ice damage bonus. When Permafrost ends, your Frost Crystal count resets to the amount before you casted Permafrost. This means you should only cast Permafrost when you have the max amount of Frost Crystals. Now, we unlock Continuous Stream and Frost Crystal Empowerment. Continuous Stream increases ice damage bonus up to 5% every time you deal damage. Frost Crystal Empowerment increases your intellect when you consume Frost Crystals. For every crystal consumed, increase intellect by 25 up to 5 times. These two nodes are what ensures your consistent damage increase. Next, go for Icicle Volley. For every 10 casts of Frostlands, launch a Piercing Spear to deal massive damage. Go for Glacier Fury next. Consuming 15 Frost Crystals enhances the next Blizzard, removing the cast time and increases the damage by 30%. This also triggers a Lucky Strike. With this node, we can now replace Maelstrom with Blizzard. Lastly, unlock Critical Cold. This increases the entire party's crit by 3% while increasing your own crit damage by 15%. That is all for the talent tree for the consistent damage build. For the burst damage build, remove Continuous Stream and Frost Crystal Empowerment. Instead, take Frost Assault and Frost Lens Crit. Frost Assault empowers your Blizzard to reduce the ice resistance of enemies hit by 10%. This effect lasts for 10 seconds and it does not stack. It also only applies to you. Frost Lens Crit increases the crit damage of Frost Lens up to 15% when Frost Lens lands crits. However, it only lasts for 6 seconds and stacks 10 times, so it takes time to ramp up and is hard to maintain without a high crit attribute. Therefore, this build requires you to have high crit or you will lose this buff very often and have to rebuild it whenever you drop this buff. The rest of the talent tree remains the same. Let's move on to gems which you can embed on every single piece of equipment. You will want to use Ruby Abyss gems. Ruby Abyss gems grant crit and intellect, which is what you want embedded onto all your equipment. Next, we have the recommended modules. The recommended module choices are Damage Stack, Life Wave, Elite Strike, Intellect Boost, Crit Focus, and Special Attack. Damage Stack has a chance to increase damage done to enemies when you deal damage. Life Wave is also a very good module that increases your highest advanced attribute by 10% for 5 seconds whenever there is a change in health. Elite Strike increases the damage you do against elite and boss enemies. Intellect Boost increases your intellect stat while also increasing your magic damage. Crit Focus increases crit damage. Special Attack increases Frost Lance elemental damage. However, Damage Stack and Life Wave can only appear in gold modules, which are very rare to get, so it is not mandatory to go for these module nodes. For the Void Emblem, run Void Corruption Pulse, Void Corruption Power, and Void Corruption Arcane. These are not as important, so you do not need to follow these 3 exactly. We also have gear sets that are obtainable from 20-man raids. I recommend you to only craft these 4 specific pieces out of the 6 available pieces of gear. Craft the helmet, armor, and the left and right bracelets. The set effects are as follows. For the 2 set effect, casting Crystal Veil increases Frost Lens damage by 15% for 10 seconds. For the 4 set effect, Frost Lens crit damage increases by 15%. Additionally, consuming a Frost Crystal increases Blizzard's damage by 5% for 10 seconds and can stack up to 10 times. Finally, let's take a look at the Imagines. For epic Imagine options, we have the Muku Scout to passively increase your attack power while consistently dealing damage. We also have the Infernal Goblin Mage to increase your intellect. For legendary Imagine options, we have Muku Chief to increase your crit and crit damage. Another option is Venom Bazaar Incubator to apply vulnerability to enemies to increase the damage they take. You do not run NPC Imagines as a damage dealer. For all players, I recommend going Muku Chief and Muku Scout. These 2 Imagines are the Icicle Mage's best in slot. If you're a spender, max both out. If you're on F2P, it is recommended to focus on Muku Scout while slowly upgrading Muku Chief to the max. As you can see, it is 1 legendary and 1 epic Imagine, which makes this class one of the most F2P friendly damage dealers in BPSR. So how do you play this spec? Don't worry, this spec is very easy to play. Before I explain, remember to never cast Frost Lance without any Frost Crystals. Do not cast Blizzard when it is not enhanced as well. To start, use both of your Imagines to gain their effects. Next, cast Crystal Veil once and Meteor Storm twice to instantly gain 3 Frost Crystals. Cast your ultimate, and by now, you should have 4 Frost Crystals. Cast Permafrost and spam Frost Lance until you run out of Frost Crystals. While casting Frost Lances, weave in Crystal Veils and Meteor Storms if available to continue generating Frost Crystals if you're low on it. If you're out of Frost Crystals and both Meteor Storm and Crystal Veil are on cooldown, use basic attacks to generate it. When 15 Frost Crystals have been consumed, cast Blizzard in its enhanced state. When 20 Frost Crystals have been consumed and you are not in Permafrost state, you will enter the Endless Cold state. Keep casting Meteor Storm as long as you are in this state. However, cast Frost Lance whenever a Frost Crystal is maxed. After you exit the Endless Cold state, repeat the rotation if Permafrost is on cooldown. Once Permafrost is close to coming off cooldown, try to time your Frost Crystal generation to cap it as soon as Permafrost comes off cooldown. Cast it, and then repeat the loop. And there you have it. That is how to play Icicle Mage. Take some time to digest the huge chunk of information you have just consumed. When you first start playing it and are still unfamiliar with the rotations, it will be a little bit hard, and you will find yourself looking at the Frost Crystal resource bar most of the time. However, once you are used to the rotations, it will be very easy and you no longer need to stare at the Frost Crystal resource bar 99% of the time. Here is a 1-minute rotation of the consistent damage build Icicle Mage in action. I do not have Muku Chief, so my damage will be low, but the rotation is the same. That is all for the Icicle Mage. Let us now move on to the Frostbeam Mage. This spec is more focused on dealing AoE damage and is amazing at clearing groups of mobs quickly. It also deals surprisingly good damage against bosses even though boss fights are usually single target. Starting off with the advanced attributes. The Frostbeam Mage prioritizes crit, haste, mastery, then versatility. Crit is the most important stat for most damage dealer classes since it greatly increases your damage. We go for haste next, since for the Frostbeam spec, it also increases damage as it increases the speed at which all your damage ticks proc. Combined with Permafrost, you can increase your haste by a lot. The reason why you further build onto your haste despite Permafrost already giving you so much haste is because haste scales very well with Frostbeam. Mastery increases your ice element damage, so it is good to have. We take a talent note later that doubles your mastery under certain conditions, so having a decently high mastery stat is enough. We also want a bit of versatility since it is multiplicative with the rest of the attributes. However, if gear sets are not available yet, meaning at level 40 gear, ignore versatility and build mastery instead. For my min-maxers, you want around 35% crit, 30% haste, 25% mastery, and 15% versatility. Let's take a look at what skills we run. The special attack will change into Frostbeam, and the ultimate, Glacier Hymn, will remain. The expertise skills we want to run are Maelstrom, Tide Pool, Crystal Veil, and Permafrost. Once again, you can choose to run Frost Shelter over Crystal Veil for a way to dodge high damage attacks from bosses. Here are what the skills do. Frostbeam consumes 15 points of ice energy to fire a beam of concentrated ice energy in the target direction, dealing magic damage every 0.3 seconds to all enemies caught in the beam. After dealing damage 5 times in a row, consume more ice energy to maintain the beam. Every 12 points of ice energy maintains the beam for 0.3 seconds longer and deals 1 additional tick of damage. Each damage dealt by Frostbeam increases its damage by 8%, up to a maximum of 80%. Frostbeam stops firing if less than 3 points of ice energy remain. The interval between Frostbeam dealing damage is affected by haste. Glacier Hymn summons an ice domain around you, knocking enemies back and summoning a comment on the target enemy, dealing magic damage and freezing all enemies hit. While in the domain, restore 220 ice energy over time and enter the ultra cold state. While in ultra cold state, enemies are treated as frozen. Frozen targets take 20% more damage and unfreeze when hit. Maelstrom summons a water vortex below the targeted enemy, pulls surrounding enemies in, and deals magic damage. Each time damage is dealt, restore 2 ice energy for every enemy hit. While in the ultra cold state, the water vortex will freeze and explode upon ending, dealing magic damage to enemies. Tidepool summons a water tornado on the targeted enemy, dealing magic damage. This skill channels for 5 seconds and it can be manually cancelled. While in the ultra cold state, the tornado will freeze and explode upon ending, dealing magic damage to enemies. Crystal Veil casts a slow-moving water orb that slows down even more when hitting an enemy. It continuously deals damage and applies frost, slowing enemies by 30%. Immediately gain a frost crystal when cast, and every 3 seconds after, gain an additional 1. When in the ultra cold state, the water orb will freeze and explode upon ending, dealing magic damage to enemies. You can cast Crystal Veil before casting an ultimate, and it will still freeze and explode. This skill has 2 charges. Permafrost is a 10-second buff skill that generates 6 ice energy per second and increases haste for the duration. Frost Shelter encases you in ice, making you immune to all damage but unable to move for the duration. This deals magic damage to all nearby enemies and inflicts slow, which slowly freezes the enemies. Now, here's the talent build for Frostbeam Mage. Frostbeam replaces your special attack with Frostbeam, and each frost crystal you possess increases the damage of Frostbeam by 15%, but increases its ice energy consumption by 30%. The first talent node you take is Crystal Resonance. This allows your Frostbeam to have a chance to trigger ice arrows, increasing the damage you do while casting Frostbeam. Next, take Cold Retention. During permafrost, decrease the cost of Frostbeam by 25%. Early on, you will suffer from resource management issues and will have a lot of downtime, especially in boss fights. Taking this node helps to alleviate some of the pressure. Unlock Tide Mastery next. This allows you to channel Tidepool while casting Frostbeam, which helps a lot in increasing the damage you do and proves helpful later on to regenerate energy while casting Frostbeam to keep the uptime of Frostbeam high. Go for Frost Jade Staff and Frost Revelation next. Frost Jade Staff has a chance to regenerate 3 ice energy when an ice arrow deals damage. During permafrost, double this chance. Frost Revelation causes Tidepool to regenerate 5 ice energy when you hit an enemy with it. Each frost crystal possessed increases the ice energy restored by 10. Having these 2 nodes will help a lot in restoring ice energy and maintaining the uptime of Frostbeam. Unlock Frost Domain next. This node reduces the size of the domain summoned by Glacier Hymn, but while you stand in it, you gain a 25% ice damage bonus. This is really good since you do not actually need the knockback from the Frost Domain. Now, go for Ray's Swan Song. This is the node that doubles your mastery for 3 seconds. It has a 10% chance of occurring when Frostbeam does damage, which is going to happen almost all the time when Frostbeam is being cast. Next, go for Frost Tide, Glazed Vastness, and Quick Frozen Blast. Frost Tide increases Frostbeam's ice damage bonus by 5% when Frost Crystal is capped. Glazed Vastness increases damage done to elite and bosses. Quick Frozen Blast triggers a Frost Shock whenever an expertise skill or your ultimate deals damage to a frozen target. These 3 nodes will help to increase your damage. If you have followed the tree up to here so far, you will have spent 50 points in total and can move on to the bottom part of the tree. If not, you might have missed out on some of the intermediate nodes, so have a look and see which ones you might have missed out on. Moving on, take Rapid Ice Arrow and Endless Tide. During permafrost, Frostbeam fires 2 additional ice arrows when triggered. However, Lucky Strike damage is halved. Endless Tide extends the duration of permafrost by 0.5 seconds up to 5 seconds whenever 1 ice arrow is triggered. This helps to increase damage as well as energy regeneration and maximize permafrost's uptime. Next, take Ice Energy Expansion to increase your ice energy limit. Take Power of Ice Crystals and Sharp Ice Arrow next. Power of Ice Crystals increases ice damage when ice energy is above 50%. Sharp Ice Arrow increases the critical rate of ice arrows by 50% and increases the crit damage by 10%. Go back up the tree to take Icy Calm next. This increases your highest advanced attribute by 2%, up to 10% for 5 seconds when your expertise skill or ultimate hits enemies. This is a free stat boost for Frostbeam Mage. Next, take Quick Chant to increase your haste, and while permafrost is active, also increases your cast speed. Now, go for Continuous Stream to increase ice damage bonus whenever you deal damage. To further increase the uptime of Frostbeam and to also regenerate ice energy quickly, take Ice Shard Pact. This node increases Maelstrom's ice energy recovery rate by 200%. Finally, we go for Cold Pulse and Intellect Amp. Cold Pulse is triggered to deal extra damage every 50 instances of damage dealt. Intellect Amp increases your intellect by 5%. That is all for the talent tree for Frostbeam Mage. Let us move on to gems. You will want to use Ruby Abyss gems. Ruby Abyss gems grant crit and intellect, which is what you want embedded onto all your equipment. Next, we have the recommended modules. The recommended module choices are Damage Stack, Life Wave, Elite Strike, Intellect Boost, Crit Focus, and Cast Focus. Damage Stack has a chance to increase damage done to enemies when you deal damage. Life Wave is also a very good module that increases your highest advanced attribute by 10% for 5 seconds whenever there's a change in health. Elite Strike increases the damage you do against elite and boss enemies. Intellect Boost increases your intellect stat while also increasing your magic damage. Crit Focus increases crit damage. Cast Focus increases your cast speed, which in turn increases your overall DPS. However, Damage Stack and Life Wave can only appear on gold modules, which are very rare to get, so it is not mandatory to go for these module nodes. While it might seem like an obvious choice to choose the special attack module, Frostbeam actually only accounts for less than 40% of your total damage. Ice Arrows, Tide Pool, and various damage procs from talent passives also hold a large portion of your damage. For the Void Emblem, run Void Corruption Arcane, Void Corruption Pulse, and Void Corruption Burst. These are not as important, so you do not need to follow these 3 exactly. We also have gear sets that are obtainable from the 20-man raids. I recommend you to only craft these 4 specific pieces out of the 6 available pieces of gear. Craft the helmet, armor, and the left and right bracelets. Set effects are as follows. For the 2 set effect, increases Frostbeam's damage by 10% and damage dealt to the main target by 5%. For the 4 set effect, 10% chance of increasing your mastery by 10% for 8 seconds when Frostbeam deals damage. Finally, let's take a look at the Imagines. For epic Imagine options, we have the Muku Scout to passively increase your attack power while consistently dealing damage. We also have the Infernal Goblin Mage to increase your intellect. For legendary Imagine options, we have Muku Chief to increase your crit and crit damage. Another option is Venom Bazaar Incubator to apply vulnerability to enemies to increase the damage they take. You do not run NPC Imagines as a damage dealer. For all players, I recommend going Muku Chief and Muku Scout. These 2 Imagines are the Icicle Mage's best in slot. If you're a spender, max both out. If you're an F2P, it is recommended to focus on Muku Scout while slowly upgrading Muku Chief to the max. As you can see, it is 1 legendary and 1 epic Imagine, which makes this class one of the most F2P friendly damage dealers in BPSR. So how do you play this spec? Don't worry, this spec is even easier to play than Icicle. Your whole burst rotation consists of clicking all your skills once in a certain order. The slightly complicated part comes after you run out of ice energy from your burst rotation. First, we start off with the burst rotation. Use both Crystal Veil charges to generate Frost Crystals. Then use both Imagines to gain their effects. Use your ultimate, then activate Permafrost. Cast Maelstrom, then cast Frostbeam and Tide Pool at the same time. When you run out of ice energy, we move on to the standard damage rotation. This is when your DPS will take a hit, since you won't be able to ramp up Frostbeam or cast Tide Pool since it is on cooldown. This is your standard rotation. Cast Maelstrom if off cooldown to recover ice energy. Use Frostbeam for about 2 seconds or until ice energy drops below half of your ice energy capacity. Press the skill again to cancel it. Repeat this until Permafrost is up. Once it is available again, we start the burst rotation again. Congratulations, you have successfully learned how to play Frostbeam. This is one of the simplest specs in the game to learn, and you just need to learn how to position properly during boss fights. Here is a 1-minute rotation of the Frostbeam Mage in action. That is all for the Frostbeam Mage build. I will now explain the pros and cons of each spec and which is more suitable for you. Both specs actually deal around the same amount of damage against bosses, with the Icicle spec edging ahead a little bit. However, the Icicle spec suffers during mobbing phases, which makes Frostbeam superior in that sense. So why would someone play Icicle spec over Frostbeam spec? Simple. Icicle is just much more fun to play. It is a lot more active and has a lot more mobility than Frostbeam. When I say it does almost the same amount of damage, it's assuming both specs are played optimally. It's not easy to play Frostbeam in boss fights where it requires you to dodge or move a lot. Frostbeam only deals damage when it's allowed to ramp up and doesn't need to move. Most boss fights in BPSR require you to be on the move, so Frostbeam is disadvantaged by needing to cut short your burst rotation. However, Icicle does not suffer from this, since you can still move around while casting your skills. So unless you have a pre-made that is able to minimize the amount of times you have to move out of the way to dodge or do mechanics, it is recommended to play Icicle if you are looking to pump damage against bosses. Frostbeam is still the king of AoE though. In mobbing content like mobbing floors in the Stimmen Vaults and the first part of all dungeons, Frostbeam excels in clearing those contents the fastest. And for some players, another pro to Frostbeam is it does not require you to click that much as compared to Icicle. So in conclusion, if you prefer a more active gameplay, play Icicle Mage. If you prefer a more laid-back style, play Frostbeam. Both specs are very strong, so there is no wrong answer here. Only major difference is the way they are played, so as long as you enjoy playing them, it does not matter. You can also choose to swap specs whenever you want, since with gear sets, it is very easy to do so. It might not be the most optimal stats, but it's definitely playable. Remember, what matters is that you have fun in what you choose to play. Once again, the written versions of this guide are on Maxroll, link in the description, so do check them out and you can refer to them in the future if there are any minor changes made to the builds. If there are any major changes like balance patch updates, we will update the guides very quickly to provide you guys up-to-date information. So enough yapping, that is all I have for this guide. Thank you guys for watching, hit that subscribe button and also follow me on Twitch to catch me live and ask any questions you guys might have. See you next time, bye bye!